You know I have been watching people make choices for the better part of 70 years now. And I can tell you this much. The moments that truly matter do not announce themselves with fanfare. They do not arrive dressed in their Sunday best or carrying a banner that says, "Pay attention." No. They creep up quiet on an ordinary Tuesday maybe when the sun is beating down and you are just trying to get through another day without breaking apart. That September afternoon in 1882, standing on a depot platform in Millerton, Texas, I learned something about the difference between being chosen and being truly seen. The good Lord works in mysterious ways, they say, and I reckon that is true. But sometimes his mysteries look an awful lot like two broken people finding each other when the whole world has turned its back on both of them. This here is the story of Lenora Hargrove and Josiah Thorne, and how being the last one nobody wanted turned out to be the first day of everything that mattered. The noon sun hammered down on the wooden platform like it held a personal grudge against every living soul gathered at the Millerton Depot. The heat was the kind that made the air shimmer and dance above the railroad tracks, turning the distant horizon into something that looked like water, but was nothing more than a lie the sky told to keep people hoping. Lenora Hargrove pressed her tongue against the roof of her mouth, trying to work up enough moisture to swallow. The tin water dipper had made 2 passes among the 10 women standing on that platform, but she had refused both times. Let the others drink first. She had learned that much about survival in her 28 years of living. Never show need when wolves are watching. Never let them see the thirst in your eyes when they are already searching for reasons to walk away. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Prescott's voice boomed across the gathered crowd like he was selling patent medicine at the county fair. His suit was too tight, and his smile was too wide, and his eyes kept darting to Lenora, and then away again, the way a man looks at a problem he does not know how to solve. Fine women here, every one of them trained in the domestic arts and ready to make a worthy companion. Miss Catherine Lowell from Pennsylvania. She can read, write, and cipher. A rancher with silver threading through his temples stepped forward and helped Miss Catherine down from the platform. The blonde girl smiled prettily, her relief visible as morning dew on grass. 1 down, 9 to go. Lenora kept her eyes fixed on the flat horizon where the railroad tracks disappeared into heat shimmer. She could feel the crowd's attention sliding over her like oil on water, never quite sticking, never quite settling. She was the one in the plain brown dress, the one whose hair would not hold a curl in this humidity, the one who stood slightly apart from the others, as if separation was something she had practiced until it became permanent. The woman beside her, Mrs. Garrett from Missouri widow with 2 boys, and hips that spoke of proven fertility, shifted her weight from foot to foot. Heard about you. Mrs. Garrett whispered it, not unkindly, but not with friendship either. Just the flat delivery of fact, the one that got sent back. Cannot have children. The words hung between them like laundry on a line, visible to anyone who cared to look. Lenora did not flinch. She had heard worse, been called worse by her own blood no less, when Alden Hargrove had returned her like a broken plow after 3 years of marriage. 3 years of trying. 3 years of monthly disappointments that turned into quarterly arguments, that turned into a silence so complete it made the grave seem chatty. Her father had not even looked up from his newspaper when she stood on his porch that final day. Her mother had pressed traveling money into her palm and closed the door. Soft, but final. The sound of that latch catching was the last thing Lenora heard from the life she had known. Miss Dorothy Brennan, accomplished seamstress, can make a man's shirt from pattern to final button. Another rancher claimed his prize. 8 women left. The spaces between bodies grew wider now, like gaps in a fence that let the wind howl through. Each selection made the remaining women more visible, more exposed, more obviously unchosen. Lenora noticed how the claimed women looked back over their shoulders as they walked away. That mixture of pity and relief painted across their faces. There but for the grace of God. That look said everything about what it meant to be a woman in 1882. Your value measured in what you could produce, your worth calculated by the children you could bear, and the man who would claim you. The crowd pressed closer. She could smell their sweat mixed with tobacco, their Sunday perfume already soured in the September heat. Women in calico dresses whispered behind gloved hands. Men spat tobacco juice and made observations just loud enough for the platform to hear. Something wrong with that one in brown. A voice carried from somewhere in the crowd. Got to be, if she is here, second time around. Another agreed with the satisfaction of someone feeding on another person's misery. Returned merchandise is what that is. Prescott should not even be showing her. Her fingernails bit crescents into her palms. She could feel the skin breaking the small, sharp pain that was almost relief because it gave her something to focus on besides the laughter building like storm clouds. But she kept her face smooth as fresh churned butter. She had practiced this expression in the mirror at Mrs. Donnelly's boarding house. How to look through people instead of at them. How to stand as if shame was not eating her alive from the inside out. Mrs. Garrett, widowed but proven fertile. 2 healthy boys. The woman beside her practically flew off the platform into the arms of a German farmer who looked steady as good timber. 7 left. The spaces widened further. Lenora could feel herself becoming more visible with each selection. Like watching dawn creep across the prairie when you would rather stay hidden in darkness. The younger girls went fast. Sarah to the banker's son, Louise to the telegraph operator, Mary Elizabeth to someone's cousin from Austin. 4 left, 3, 2, then just Lenora. The laughter started soft like wind through standing corn. Then it built into something uglier. Something with teeth in it, something that fed on itself the way a prairie fire feeds on dry grass. Mr. Prescott's face had gone red as a ripe tomato. His papers rustled as he searched for something, anything to say. Now then, Miss Hargrove here. She is experienced in household management and general domestic. The laughter swelled like a river in flood season. Someone in the back shouted loud enough for the whole town to hear. Experienced, all right. Just cannot close the deal. Her knees wanted to buckle. Her throat closed tight as a new boot pulled on for the first time. The blood from her palms was making her fingers slick, but she kept standing, kept staring at that horizon line as if it might open up and offer passage to somewhere else. Anywhere else. She thought about the narrow room at the boarding house she would have to return to. The knowing looks from the other boarders. The whispers that would follow her to whatever town she tried next. And the town after that. That is when she heard it. Boots on wood. Steady and unhurried as a heartbeat. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable the way sunrise comes whether you want it to or not. The laughter stuttered. Then it stopped altogether, sudden and complete, like someone had closed a door on it. The crowd parted with the quiet shuffle of people who recognize something they cannot name but instinctively respect. And through that corridor of suddenly silent faces came Josiah Thorne. Lenora knew who he was. Everyone in 3 counties knew. The rancher who had lost his wife and baby 3 years back to a birth that went wrong in every way a birth can go wrong. The one who never came to town socials or tipped his hat to marriageable girls or smiled at much of anything anymore. He had become a story people told. A cautionary tale about what grief could do to a man if he let it settle in and make itself at home. He stood tall in that way that comes not from trying to be imposing, but from years of working cattle and mending fences. His clothes were clean but worn thin at the elbows. His face was weathered by sun and something deeper that lived behind his eyes. Something that Lenora recognized because she saw it every morning in her own reflection. He stopped at the base of the platform, but instead of looking at her face the way the others had, searching for what was wrong with her, his eyes went to her hands. She looked down and realized she had unclenched her fists. Tiny crescents of blood marked where her nails had broken skin. The evidence of every joke she had absorbed, every whisper she had swallowed. He saw her hands, and he understood. "Mr. Thorne," Prescott stammered, mopping his face with a yellowed handkerchief. "I was not. That is to say, I had no idea you were in the market for. Was not." Josiah's voice came out rough as burlap dragged over stone. "Changed my mind just now." He looked up then and met her eyes directly. Not with pity. Not with the calculation of a man evaluating livestock. Just looking, like he was seeing something everyone else in that crowd had missed. This one. He said it loud enough for every person in Millerton to hear. "We are going." The silence that followed was complete as a church at prayer. Lenora felt the platform sway beneath her feet, though she knew it was solid pine. Her mouth opened, but no words came. What do you say when someone reaches into the fire and pulls you out just as the flames begin to catch? "Mr. Thorne." Prescott tried again, shuffling his papers nervously. "I feel obligated to inform you of certain circumstances regarding Miss Hargrove's previous marriage. Do not need to know." Josiah had already turned away. She coming or not? It took Lenora 3 tries to make her voice work. "I am coming." He nodded once, then started walking back through the crowd. She grabbed her carpet bag, light as hope and heavy as failure, and followed. The townspeople pulled back like she might be contagious, their faces twisted with confusion and something else underneath it. Disappointment that the show had not ended the way they expected. That is Josiah Thorne taking on another man's leavings. Someone whispered, "Fool's errand. She will disappoint him too." Another replied, but Lenora kept walking, following those steady shoulders through the crowd. Her legs shook with each step, but she did not stumble, did not look back. The platform and its humiliation fell away behind her, and ahead lay something she could not name or predict. But it had to be better than standing alone while the world laughed. When they reached his wagon, practical, unadorned, built for work, not show, he stopped beside it, did not reach for her bag, did not grab her elbow to help her up, just stood there waiting. She understood. Even now, even after claiming her in front of the whole town, he was giving her the choice. She could walk away, could return to the boarding house and the slow death of being unwanted, or she could climb into that wagon. She threw her carpet bag in the back, grabbed the sideboard with both bloody hands, hauled herself up. Her boots caught in her skirts, and she nearly tumbled, but she managed without help. When she settled on the hard wooden bench, something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, something closer to recognition. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, clicked his tongue at the mule team. They rolled forward, leaving the depot and its laughter behind in the dust. The silence between them was different from the silence on that platform. That had been the quiet before execution. This silence was something else. Lenora did not have a name for it yet, but she noticed she could breathe inside of it, could feel her lungs expanding fully for the first time in hours, maybe years. They passed the last buildings of Millerton, and then there was nothing but prairie stretching in every direction under a sky so big it made everything human seem like an afterthought. Lenora finally spoke. Why? Josiah did not answer right away. The mules plodded on, steady as heartbeat. A hawk circled overhead, riding invisible currents in the endless blue. When he did speak, he did not look at her. You did not beg. That was all. 3 words. But they told Lenora he had been watching longer than she realized, that he had seen not just the blood on her hands, but the steel in her spine. In a world that measured women by what they could produce, this man had measured her by what she refused to surrender. They rode on in silence. He told her about the ranch. 160 acres, most of it scrub. House has 4 rooms and a lean-to. She asked about the lean-to. He said he had built it the month before. It had its own door. Lock on the inside. You built me a room before you knew I existed. Built someone a room. Figured whoever answered the advertisement would want space of their own. So he had placed an advertisement for a bride, like ordering from the Sears catalog. Only he had not even come to the depot to meet the women until something changed his mind. You were not at the depot to meet us. Was not planning on it. What changed? He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. The hawk still circled. The mules plodded on. Saw the crowd gathering like carrion birds. Went to see what the fuss was about. And found her. The last one. The rejected one. The one nobody wanted. I work hard. Lenora said, needing to say something true. Do not complain. Do not expect much. Good. Neither do I. Before they reached the creek where the cottonwoods grew, Lenora saw a rider waiting in the shade ahead. Hat pulled low. Papers rolled in his hand like a weapon he had not decided whether to use. Josiah's shoulders went tight. That is Prescott. Must have taken the cut-through. The bride agent sat his horse with the patience of a man holding winning cards. Those rolled papers kept tapping against his thigh like a clock counting down. Mr. Thorne, Prescott touched his hat brim. Miss Hargrove, I simply cannot in good conscience let this proceed without full disclosure. It is done, Prescott. You got your fee. We got our arrangement. Nothing left between us. That is where you are wrong. Prescott shifted in his saddle. I have obligations, legal ones. When a woman has been previously married and returned, there are documents, waivers, protections for the receiving party. Lenora's stomach clenched. Here it came. Every shameful detail served fresh for Josiah Thorne to digest. Do not need protecting. Josiah clicked his tongue at the mules, started them walking. Prescott nudged his horse sideways, blocking the path to water. The mules tossed their heads, smelling the creek just beyond. You need to know what you are taking on. This woman is sitting right here. The words jumped out of Lenora before she could stop them. Both men turned to look at her. She straightened her spine until it felt like iron. Whatever you think needs saying, Mr. Prescott, say it to my face. Not about me like I am furniture. Prescott started talking and did not stop. 3 years married, no children. Husband testified to normal marital relations. Doctor in Fort Worth confirmed the deficiency was not on the husband's side. The word barren was used. Every private agony laid bare in the Texas sun like gutted fish on a dock. Josiah was off the wagon before she could blink. Not rushing, just moving with the quiet inevitability of something that cannot be stopped once started. He walked to Prescott's horse, put one hand on the bridle, and looked up at the agent. Empty. He repeated the word like he was tasting it. You want to talk to me about empty? My house has been empty 3 years. Got 2 stones in my yard, side by side, marking the places where everything I loved is buried. Empty. You think this woman is going to make any of that worse? Prescott swallowed hard enough that Lenora could see his throat working from 10 feet away. I just thought you should. No, you did not think. You wanted your show. You wanted your drama. Well, you got it back at the depot. Now get gone. For one heartbeat, Prescott looked like he might argue. Then he wheeled his horse around and spurred harder than the animal deserved. Dust settled over everything like judgment. Josiah watched until horse and rider disappeared over the rise. Then he walked back and climbed up beside her. Sorry about that. At the creek, the mules waded in and drank deep, while Josiah checked their hooves with patience that could not be faked, running his hands down each leg, feeling for stones or anything that might cause pain if left unattended. Lenora watched him tend those animals with the kind of care most men reserved for things worth money, not things that merely breathed and bled and trusted. You should know. She said it to his back. What he said about me. About there being no children. It is true. He straightened up. Water dripped from his hands and caught the light. You should know that my wife died trying to give me one. Baby died too. Took the better part of a day for both of them to go while I sat there useless. He wiped his hands on his pants. So if you are worried I am looking for someone to fill a nursery, you can stop worrying. The words should have been harsh, but they came out tired, worn smooth from handling, like riverbed stones tumbled so long they have lost all their edges. Then why? Lenora asked. Why take a wife at all? He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were the color of winter grass, gray-green and distant. Ranch does not run itself. Need another pair of hands. Someone who can do what needs doing without expecting much. That is all. That is all. She nodded slowly. It was honest. More honest than Alden had ever been with his promises of love, eternal, that lasted until the doctor used the word that changed everything. I can do that. Work for my keep. Good. He pulled the canteen from under the seat, offered it to her. The water was warm and tasted of leather and metal, but it was wet, and that was enough. I do not talk much. Do not go to town. Do not have people over unless business requires. Do not expect that to change. Suits me fine. House is rough. Functional, but not pretty. Do not have money for pretty. Pretty never did me any favors anyway. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, just a movement at the corner of his mouth that changed his whole expression for a half a second. Made him look younger. Made him look like someone who had once known how to laugh. One more thing. He capped the canteen with careful hands. The lean-to room off the kitchen. It is yours. Your space. I built it before I knew who was coming. Has its own door and a lock on the inside. I will not come in uninvited. Will not expect you in mine. We share the kitchen and the work. That is all we share. Understood. The relief hit Lenora so sudden and so complete, she had to grip the wagon seat. Alden had taken what he called his marital rights every night for 3 years, even after the doctor said there was no point. Even when corn liquor made him mean enough to remind her exactly why there was no point. Understood. She managed, and the word came out steady, even though nothing inside her was. Good. He climbed back up and released the brake. 4 more miles, maybe 5. They pulled out of the stream water running off the wheels in silver threads. The sun had passed its peak, throwing their shadow alongside like a third passenger. Lenora settled back on the hard bench and felt something she had not felt in so long she had forgotten its name. Not hope, exactly. Not peace. But maybe the space where those things could take root if given enough time and quiet and room to grow. Then she saw it. A rider coming fast from the direction of the ranch. Dust cloud rising behind him like smoke from a fire that had not yet shown its flames. Josiah's hands tightened on the reins, and she felt him go tense in a way he had not been with Prescott or the crowd or anything else during this long, impossible afternoon. "That is Boone," he said. "My neighbor's boy. He would not ride like that unless something was wrong." The boy was shouting something, but the wind tore his words into pieces and scattered them across the prairie. All Lenora could make out was the panic in his voice and the way he kept pointing back toward the horizon where dark smoke was beginning to rise against the pale September sky. And just like that, the space where hope might have grown filled with something else entirely. Boone Caldwell's horse was lathered white when he pulled up hard beside the wagon. The boy could not be more than 15, his face red as raw beef under a hat 2 sizes too big for him. Words tumbled out between gasps like water from a broken pump. "Mr. Thorne, fire jumped the creek south of your place. Pa says the wind is pushing it north, maybe 2 miles from your south pasture. Could reach your grass by sundown if it does not turn." Josiah was already turning the wagon before the boy finished speaking. His hands moved on the reins with the calm efficiency of a man who had faced fire before and knew that panic killed faster than flames. How far? 2 miles. Maybe less. Wind shifted about an hour ago. Pa sent me to warn you and anyone else on the north side. Stock is in the home pasture. Should be safe for now. Tell your pa I appreciate the warning. Yes, sir. The boy wheeled his horse, then stopped and turned back. Sir, we could use every hand if you are willing. After you see to your place, I will come. Josiah waited until Boone was galloping away before he turned to Lenora. His eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Not worry exactly. Something harder than worry. The look of a man calculating losses before they happen. Change of plans. The smoke on the horizon had thickened, spreading like spilled ink across the bottom edge of the sky. Lenora could smell it now. Not wood smoke, but grass smoke. Sharp and mean and carrying with it the scent of everything it had already consumed. Fire is not threatening the house. Josiah said it while working the reins to speed the mules without panicking them. But I need to check the fire breaks I plowed last month. Make sure they will hold. Strips of turned earth around the property. Stops fire from spreading most times. Most times. He did not respond to that. They crested a low hill and Lenora saw the ranch for the first time. A low house of rough lumber and cedar posts that looked like it had grown from the land rather than been built on top of it. No paint, no decoration, no flower boxes or curtains visible through the windows, just wood and stone and function. A barn stood off to one side with a corral attached. Chicken coop near the back. Everything about the place said the same thing the wagon said. The same thing the man beside her said. Built for work. Built to last. Built by someone who had stopped caring about beauty a long time ago. Josiah pulled up at the front door and jumped down, grabbed her carpet bag from the back and set it on the porch without ceremony. Come on, I will show you what is what. We do not have much time. The house smelled of bacon grease and dust and the particular staleness that accumulates in a space where only one person has been breathing for too long. 4 rooms, as promised. A kitchen that served as the main living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small parlor that looked like it had not seen human activity since the day the furniture was placed in it. Stoveworks, but the damper sticks. He was moving through the space fast, pointing things out with the economy of a man who had no words to waste. Pump is at the kitchen sink. Water is good. Comes from a spring. Root cellar through that door. Smokehouse out back. He pushed open a door at the rear of the kitchen, and Lenora saw the lean-to room. Narrow but private. Its own door leading outside, just as he had described. A simple iron bed with a cornshuck mattress. A washstand with a chipped basin. Hooks on the wall for clothes. A small window with flour sack curtains that someone had hemmed with careful stitches. And there on both doors, the inside one leading to the kitchen and the outside one leading to the yard, brass bolts. New, the metal still bright and unscratched. Lock is there, he pointed, and there. Nobody bothers you in this room. Lenora set her carpet bag on the bed. The mattress crinkled under its small weight. The room smelled of new lumber and emptiness and possibility if you were the kind of person still capable of believing in such things. Chickens are in the coop by the barn, probably need feeding. Grain is in the barn in marked bins. There are preserved goods in the cellar, salt pork in the smokehouse. Make yourself at home. He was already backing out of the kitchen, pulling on his work gloves, his mind clearly on the fire and the fire breaks and everything that needed doing before dark. You are leaving now. Fire does not wait. I need to help the Caldwells and check my own lines. Might not be back until late. Maybe morning. She swallowed the rest of what she wanted to say. What was she going to tell him? That she had never been alone on a ranch. That she did not know where anything was. That the thought of spending her first night in a stranger's house without even the stranger present made her chest feel like someone was sitting on it. You will be fine. He said it like fact. The same way he might say the sun rises in the east or winter follows autumn. Not encouragement. Just truth, as he understood it. House is solid. You have food, water, shelter. Lock the doors if it makes you feel better. Then he was gone. She heard the wagon rattling away faster now than it had been all afternoon. The sound grew smaller and thinner until it disappeared entirely and left Lenora standing in the middle of a kitchen that belonged to a man she had met 3 hours ago in a house she had never seen before in a county she could not have found on a map yesterday morning. Through the window she could see the smoke growing darker on the horizon. Closer, maybe, though, distance was hard to judge on flat land. The light had turned the color of old brass, giving everything a strange underwater quality that made the kitchen feel like the inside of a jar. She stood there for what might have been a minute, or might have been 10. Then she did what she had always done when the world handed her something she did not ask for and could not control. She went to work. She started with inventory. Cast iron stove that needed blacking but was solid underneath the neglect. A table with 2 chairs, one worn smooth from daily use, and the other filmed with dust that said nobody had sat in it for a very long time. Shelves with a few dishes, none matching, most chipped. A coffee pot on the stove with grounds from that morning still sitting in cold water. Grease spots on the wall behind the stove where food had been cooked by someone who did not care about spattering because there was nobody to care for. She ran her finger through the dust on the shelf. A line of clean wood showed beneath. Everything in this house was good underneath. Good bones, her mother would have said back when her mother still said things to her. Water from the pump ran rusty at first, then clear and cold. She found lye soap and rags under the sink. Started with the table, because the table was the center of a kitchen, and the kitchen was the center of a home, and if she was going to live here, she was going to start at the center and work her way out. The wood was good underneath the grime, pine boards that someone had planed smooth with care. She scrubbed until her shoulders burned, and the table showed its true color, pale gold, almost honey in the fading light. The coffee pot got scoured next the old grounds tossed out the back door where they landed in dirt that had probably never seen a garden. The root cellar was down a short flight of wooden steps and smelled of earth and cool dark and time. She found treasures there. Potatoes gone soft, but not yet rotten. Onions with green shoots reaching toward light they would never find. A jar of preserved peaches that looked like liquid sunset trapped in glass. 2 jars of green beans. A crock of sauerkraut that still smelled sharp and right. The smokehouse yielded salt pork as promised, along with a ham that she tested with a knife and found good on the inside despite its weathered exterior. Practical, undecorated, sound beneath the surface, like everything else on this ranch. The chickens complained bitterly when she entered their coop. 5 hens and a rooster with ideas above his station who puffed his chest and strutted at her like she was trespassing on his personal kingdom. She found eggs, 4 of them still warm in the straw. The grain bin in the barn was clearly marked just as Josiah had promised. Everything he did seemed to be clear and ordered and without decoration. A man who said what he meant and put things where they belonged and expected the world to function the same way. Back in the kitchen, she built up the fire in the stove. The damper did stick just as he had warned, but she figured out that if you lifted the handle and twisted at the same time, it gave way with a reluctant groan, like it had been waiting for someone who cared enough to learn its particular stubbornness. She made cornbread because she had the makings, and because cornbread was the thing her hands knew how to do when her mind did not know what to think. Cornmeal and buttermilk and a little salt and an egg and the rendered fat from the salt pork she was frying in the big spider skillet. She fried the pork until it curled and crisped and filled the kitchen with a smell that pushed back against the smoke drifting in from outside. Found wild onions growing alongside the back door, their green tops bobbing in whatever breeze could find its way between the buildings. Cut them fine. Added them to the pork drippings where they sizzled and went sweet. Sliced potatoes, thin as coins, and laid them in the hot fat where they turned gold at the edges. It was not fancy. It was not the kind of meal that would impress anyone who had choices. But it would fill a working man's stomach after a day of fighting fire, and it was made with the kind of attention that turns simple food into something more. Something that says this house is not empty anymore. The sun was setting, painting everything the color of the smoke itself when she heard horses. Not one, but several. Men's voices carried across the yard, but she could not make out words. Then, footsteps on the porch. Heavy. More than one pair. The door opened. Josiah stood in the doorway, covered in soot and ash from hat to boots. His face was black with smoke, except where sweat had cut channels through the grime. And behind him, filling the doorway with their bulk, 3 men she had never seen. All equally blackened, all looking at her with expressions that ranged from surprise to curiosity, to something that made her take a step backward until her hip pressed against the table she had just finished scrubbing. Brought help with the fire, Josiah said. Fire jumped one of the breaks south of the Caldwell place, but turned back on itself before it reached my grass. The biggest of the 3 men, red beard showing through the soot like rust through paint, smiled in a way that showed too many teeth and not enough warmth. Well now, Thorne, you did not tell us you had company. He took a step into the kitchen. His boots left ash marks on the floor Lenora had spent an hour cleaning. The other 2 crowded behind him, filling the space with smoke smell and the particular energy of men who had been working hard and now wanted reward. This is my wife. Josiah's voice cut flat and final across the room. The word wife landed between the men and Lenora like a fence post driven into hard ground. Lenora. These men helped with the fire, and they are leaving now. The red-bearded man's smile faltered, rearranged itself into something more careful, but no less hungry. Wife. Since when you got a wife, Thorne? Since today? The man looked at Lenora again, looked at the cleaned kitchen, the food on the stove, the table scrubbed to bare wood. His eyes did the calculation that men like him always did. Woman alone. Man who clearly had not planned on visitors seeing her. Opportunity. Josiah moved then. Not fast, not threatening. He simply positioned himself between Lenora and the 3 men in the doorway, casual as leaning on a fence, but firm as the fence itself. When dies down tonight, fire should hold until morning. You boys best get back to your own places. Long ride in the dark. Now hold on. The second man, skinny with a farmer's permanent squint, pushed forward. We've been fighting that fire all day alongside you. Least you could do is offer some food. I can smell it from here. Lenora's hands found the table edge behind her. The cornbread was cooling on the stove. Salt pork and potatoes, keeping warm in the skillet. Enough for 1 man, maybe 2 if she stretched it, not 4. Wife has had a long day too. Josiah opened the door wider, not inviting them further in, inviting them out. Just arrived from town this afternoon. Tell your pa I will come by tomorrow, Boone. Help rebuild that south break. The 3 men looked at each other. The older one, gray streaking his temples, cleared his throat and nodded. Come on, boys. Man wants his wedding night. Laughter followed them out the door and across the porch and into the dark yard where their horses waited. Lenora heard the red-bearded man say something about mail-order goods that she could not quite catch, but understood well enough from the tone. Another man laughed. Then hooves on packed earth moving away. Josiah closed the door, set the bolt, stood there with his back to her shoulders, tight as fence wire pulled to breaking. The kitchen was quiet except for the pop of the stove and the distant sound of horses fading into night. I made supper, Lenora said into the silence. If you are hungry. He turned around slowly, took in the cleaned kitchen, the food on the stove, the table she had wiped down to bare pine, the coffee pot scrubbed and heating fresh water, the floor swept, the dishes organized on shelves that had been dusty when he left 3 hours ago. You did not have to do all this. Had to eat myself. She moved to the stove and started filling a plate. Easier to move than to stand still under his gaze. Sit down. You look ready to fall over. He sat. She put the plate in front of him. Cornbread fried salt pork with the fat rendered crisp potatoes golden with wild onions. Nothing special, nothing fancy. But his eyes widened like she had set down Christmas dinner and Easter supper and his birthday meal all at once. He took a bite, closed his eyes, chewed slow the way a man chews when he wants to remember the taste long after swallowing. Been 6 months since anyone cooked in this kitchen besides me. He said it quiet, like admitting something he had not planned to say. Shows in the grease stains, Lenora replied. That got something close to a smile, closer than anything she had seen from him yet. A crack in the wall. They ate across from each other, the lantern between them throwing warm shadows on the walls. She had fixed her own plate smaller than his, but from the same skillet. Same food, same table. The domesticity of it felt strange and fragile, like holding a bird you found stunned on the ground, feeling its heartbeat against your palm, and knowing it could fly away at any second. Fire, she said. Is it truly contained? Turned back on itself. Caldwell's lost some grazing land, but no buildings. My brakes held. He reached for the cornbread and tore it in half. Happens every summer. Grass gets dry. Lightning strikes, or some fool drops a cigarette. Old Prairie goes up like kindling. He ate the cornbread slowly, and something moved across his face that Lenora could not read. A shadow of something, memory maybe. Those men, she said. They will not come back. He said it firm. Final. They know you are here now. Word will spread by morning. Nobody will bother you. She wanted to ask what would have happened if he had not called her wife, but she already knew the answer. Same thing that happened to untethered women everywhere since the beginning of time. The one with the red beard. She said, He seemed disappointed you sent them away. Josiah's jaw tightened in a way that made the muscle jump beneath the skin. Silas Brennan has ideas about what he is owed for being born male and white and owning 200 head of cattle. Best you stay clear of him. Planning on it. They finished eating in a quiet that had started to feel less like absence and more like agreement. Lenora collected the plates and pumped water to wash them. Josiah sat at the table, exhaustion settling over him like dust. She could see it in the way his shoulders curved forward, the way his hands lay flat on the table like they were too heavy to lift. You should sleep, she said. Lot of days like this one. She washed the dishes while he sat. The lamplight made the kitchen feel smaller, closer, more like a room two people shared than a space where one person rattled around alone. When she finished and hung the rag to dry, he stood. His joints popped like green wood in fire. That lean-to. Lock it tonight. Both doors. You think they will? No. But lock it anyway. She did. Both doors. Checked the bolts twice. Then lay on the corn shuck mattress, fully dressed, listening to the house settle around her. Boards creaking as the day's heat leaked out into the cooling night. Wind pushing against walls that did not give. The faint smell of smoke still threading through the air from the distant fire. Through the thin wall between her room and his, she heard Josiah moving. The scrape of boots being pulled off. The groan of bed ropes taking weight. Then breathing that turned steady and deep and unconscious. The sound of a man so tired that sleep took him before he could fight it. Lenora stared at the ceiling, counting knots in the wood the way other women might count sheep. This was her life now. This room. This house. This man who had taken her on like hiring help for the season. No romance in it. No expectation beyond competence. Just work and food and a bolt on the door and the understanding that neither of them was looking for anything more than survival. She should have felt sad about that. Should have mourned the dreams she once had of love and family and a house full of children's laughter. But those dreams had died so long ago that mourning them now would be like grieving for a stranger. Instead, she felt something else, something small and stubborn and green pushing up through hard-packed ground the way grass pushes through after fire has burned everything black. Room to breathe. That is what this was. For the first time in years, nobody was watching her for signs of failure. Nobody was measuring her against a standard she could never meet. Nobody was waiting for her to produce something her body could not make. Just work. Just keep. Just a bolt on the door and the sound of a stranger's breathing through a thin wall and the promise that tomorrow would ask nothing of her except what her hands could do. The rooster woke her before dawn, crowing like Judgment Day had arrived, and he was personally responsible for announcing it. Lenora rolled out of bed with muscles stiff from the thin mattress and dressed in darkness. Through the window, stars still pricked the sky, but the eastern horizon showed the faintest gray, like someone had breathed on dark glass. By the time she had the stove fired and coffee heating, Josiah was in the kitchen. They moved around each other, careful and precise filling space without collision, like two people who had learned the steps to the same dance in different rooms. He sliced bread. She cracked eggs. He poured coffee. She set plates. Not a word passed between them, and not a word was needed. "I will be working the home pasture today," he said, finally pulling on his boots by the door. "Fence needs checking after the fire scare. Chickens are your department now. Eggs are yours to use or sell. Same with whatever garden you might want to plant on the south side of the house. Bit late in the season. Still time for greens, turnips maybe, winter squash if frost holds off." He looked at her. The early light caught his face, and she saw surprise there quickly buried, as if he had not expected her to know anything about growing seasons or soil or the particular stubbornness of squash. She made biscuits for his noon meal because she did not know whether he would come in or stay in the field. Opened a jar of the preserved peaches, fried eggs with leftover potatoes, set it all on the table, and felt foolish, like a woman playing house in someone else's home. But he came in right at noon, washed his hands at the pump without being asked, and sat down to eat like this was established routine rather than their second meal together. "Fence is sound," he said between bites. "Lost some posts to rot on the north side. Need replacing before winter. I can help." He looked up from his plate. "You ever set fence posts?" "No, but I can learn. Maybe." He went back to eating. "Garden plot is on the south side. Has not been worked in 3 years. 3 years. Since Cicely died. Since everything in this house stopped except the things that could not stop. Heartbeat, breathing, the daily mechanics of staying alive without any particular reason to bother. Days fell into pattern after that. Up before dawn, coffee and bread, Josiah to his work and Lenora to hers. Noon dinner if he was close enough to come in. Supper as the sun set. Evenings on the porch where he whittled or mended harness, and she worked through the sewing basket she had found in the unused parlor. They did not talk much, did not need to. The work spoke for them. Fixed fences, Mended shirts, full bellies, clean floors. A week passed, then two. The burned prairie south of the ranch started showing green at its base, life pushing up through the black the way life always does when given half a chance. Lenora got the garden plot turned over, though her hands blistered raw, and her back screamed at her every morning when she bent to pull on her boots. The soil was tired, but not dead. It just needed someone willing to work it back to life. Josiah noticed the blisters, said nothing. The next evening, when she came in from the garden, a pair of leather work gloves sat on the kitchen table. Good ones, soft but sturdy, the kind that cost real money at the general store. No note, no comment, just gloves where there had not been gloves before. She learned his preferences without asking. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, beans with plenty of salt pork, cornbread over biscuits every time. He learned hers too, though she never said a word about them. The water bucket was always full on days he knew she would be doing wash. The squeaky board outside her door got fixed one afternoon while she was in the garden. She came back to silence where there had been noise and understood. The third week, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard herself humming. Some tune from childhood, barely remembered more feeling than melody. She stopped, looked around guilty as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. But Josiah was in the far pasture, too distant to hear. Nobody was watching. Nobody cared whether she hummed or sang or stood silent as stone. She went back to the washing and let the tune continue. The wet clothes snapped and billowed in the wind like flags of surrender, and the sun beat down warm on her shoulders. And for one unguarded moment, she forgot to protect herself against contentment. That is when she saw the rider approaching from the south road. Not fast like Boone Caldwell that first day, with fire in his voice and panic on his face. Slow, deliberate. A woman riding side saddle with her back so straight it looked like God himself had installed a steel rod in place of her spine. Lenora knew before the rider got close enough to identify. The way you know weather is coming before the first cloud appears. Something in the air shifting. Something in the quality of the light changing from warm to cool. Mrs. Caldwell had come to inspect the new wife. Come to measure and judge and find wanting. Come to establish the pecking order in this corner of Texas, where a woman's worth was determined not by what she could do, but by who she had been before she arrived. The humming died in Lenora's throat. She smoothed her apron, tucked loose hair behind her ears, squared her shoulders, and prepared herself for the kind of battle that draws no blood, but cuts just as deep as any blade. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you are watching from. Now let us get back to the story. Mrs. Caldwell's horse picked its way across the ranch yard like the animal's hooves were too refined for common dirt. The woman herself sat rigid in a black riding habit that must have been suffocating in the late September heat, but showed no sign of discomfort. Discipline ran through her, the way grain runs through wood. Behind her, matching pace, exactly rode a younger woman in blue calico. Willa, the daughter. 16 maybe, with her mother's sharp nose but softer eyes. Come to see the spectacle. Lenora's hands were still damp from the washing. She dried them on her apron, knowing it would leave marks not caring. Let them see her as she was. Working woman, not parlor decoration. Mrs. Thorne. The name came across the yard like a church bell rung with too much force. I do hope we are not interrupting. The name hit strange. 3 weeks wearing it, and it still felt borrowed. like a coat cut for someone else's shoulders. Mrs. Caldwell. Lenora did not move from the laundry line. Made them come to her. Willa. The daughter nodded quick, almost apologetic. Mrs. Caldwell dismounted with practiced grace and advanced across the yard with the inevitability of someone who has never once been refused entry to anywhere. We simply had to come welcome you properly. She looked at the washing the suds bucket, Lenora's wet apron. Her smile said everything her words did not. I do apologize for not coming sooner, but one heard such conflicting reports. Reports. Oh, you know how men talk. Or perhaps you do not, being newly arrived. Mrs. Caldwell pulled off her riding gloves one finger at a time. Silas Brennan mentioned that Josiah had taken a wife. My husband insisted it could not be true. Josiah has been quite firm about not remarrying since dear Cecily passed. Dear Cecily, like they had been intimate friends. Lenora knew for fact that Cecily Thorne had died before the Caldwells moved to the county. Yet here you are, Mrs. Caldwell continued. How unexpected. Would you like some coffee? Lenora said. It was not a question born from hospitality. It was strategy. Bring them inside. Let them see the clean floors and organized shelves. Let them understand that whoever lived here now was not someone to be pitied. Coffee would be lovely if you have it. One never knows what provisions a bachelor establishment might offer. Inside, Lenora saw them catalog everything. The swept porch, the mended steps, the clean windows, the scrubbed floors, the organized shelves, the absence of dust on surfaces that had been thick with it 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Caldwell's mouth tightened. She had been hoping for squalor, for evidence that this interloper was failing where Cecily would have thrived. How charming. She said in a tone that meant exactly the opposite. You have done wonders with so little to work with. Lenora set the coffee on, brought out cups. The good ones. China painted with tiny roses that she had found wrapped in newspaper at the back of the highest shelf. No saucers, but the cups themselves were delicate and pretty in a way nothing else in this house was. These were Cecily's. Mrs. Caldwell said immediately, like a dog marking territory. I remember when she ordered them from the catalog. Such refined taste she had. They are pretty. Lenora agreed without inflection, neither rising to the bait nor backing away from it. She was accomplished, you know, could play piano, spoke French. Her needlework won prizes at the county fair. A truly remarkable woman. Mama, Willa said softly from her chair. Perhaps Mrs. Thorne does not need to. Hush, Willa. I am simply making conversation. I am sure Mrs. Thorne appreciates knowing about her predecessor. Do you not, dear? Lenora poured the coffee with a hand that did not tremble. Sugar, if you want it. Josiah had brought a cone from town the previous week, left it on the table without comment the way he left everything. She chipped off pieces and set them on a plate. How delightful. Mrs. Caldwell helped herself to 3 lumps. Josiah must be doing better than one assumed. Tell me, where exactly are you from? Back east. How wonderfully vague. And your people? Dead. Mrs. Caldwell's cup paused halfway to her mouth. All of them. Enough of them. Willa shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. Her eyes kept moving to the door like she wanted to bolt through it. But she stayed, trapped by obedience and curiosity in equal measure. And how did you and Josiah meet? Mrs. Caldwell pressed on. It must have been quite the whirlwind romance, given that nobody knew he was corresponding with anyone. We met when we needed to. How romantic, Though I suppose romance is not always necessary. Sometimes practical considerations suffice. Her eyes swept over Lenora's mended dress and work-roughened hands. I imagine you are grateful for the security. I imagine Josiah is grateful for the cooking. Willa made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly smothered. Mrs. Caldwell's nostrils flared. The visit continued for another 20 minutes of questions that were not really questions and compliments that were not really compliments. By the time Mrs. Caldwell stood to leave, pulling on her gloves with sharp, precise movements, Lenora felt as though she had been examined by a doctor who found her pulse disappointing. At the chicken coop, away from her mother's ears, Willa finally relaxed enough to speak honestly while Lenora gathered eggs. I'm sorry about Mama. She gets ideas about how things should be. Most people do. She means well, usually. It is just she and Mrs. Thorne the first one they were planning to be great friends. Then Cecily died before Mama could properly establish the friendship. And Mama hates unfinished things. Lenora handed the girl an egg warm from the nest. Were you friends with her? With Cecily? I only met her once. She was very beautiful. Very delicate. Delicate. Everything Lenora was not. Delicate and beautiful and accomplished and dead. Mr. Thorne must have loved her very much. Willa continued with the earnest certainty of someone too young to understand that love and loss are not always proportional. Mama says he nearly went mad when she died. Would not let anyone help with the burial. Dug both graves himself. Both graves. Mother and baby. Lenora's hand hesitated over the next nest. But he seems better now. Willa added quickly. Boone says he has been working the ranch properly again, even whistling sometimes. Boone says a lot for a boy. Willa blushed the way only a 16-year-old girl can blush, the color spreading from her collar to her hairline like sunrise across the prairie. He is not a boy. He is 15, almost 16. Lenora hid a smile. Nearly a man then. Exactly. They walked back to find Mrs. Caldwell on the porch, lips pursed like she had been sucking lemons during their absence. There you are. We really must be going. She mounted her horse with sharp movements that communicated displeasure to the animal beneath her. Do tell Josiah we called. I am sure he will find it interesting. They rode off Mrs. Caldwell's back, rigid with disapproval, Willa turning once to wave before they disappeared down the south road in a cloud of dust. Lenora stood on the porch watching the dust settle. The air felt different now, like it does after a storm passes through, without actually breaking, charged but unresolved. She went inside to wash the coffee cups and stop her hands from shaking. That is when she saw it. There on the table where Mrs. Caldwell had been sitting, a small leather journal, worn at the edges, tied with a faded ribbon that might once have been blue. Mrs. Caldwell had not forgotten it. She had left it there deliberate as a slap across the face. Lenora picked it up and knew immediately what it was, even before she opened the cover. The weight of it in her hands was wrong. Heavier than leather and paper should be. Heavy with someone else's days and thoughts and longings. Inside the front cover, written in careful script that looked like it had been practiced on a chalkboard before being committed to paper, were the words she expected and dreaded in equal measure. Cecily Elizabeth Thorne. Her book of days. And below that, in the same perfect hand, a date. January 1st, 1879. Lenora stood in that kitchen holding the dead woman's diary and feeling the weight of all those unread words pressing against her fingers like something alive, like something that wanted to be known. She should put it aside. Give it to Josiah when he came in. Let him decide what to do with his dead wife's thoughts. But the ribbon was already untying beneath her fingers, and the first page was already falling open, and Cecily Thorne's voice was already rising from the paper like smoke from a fire that everyone thought had gone out long ago. January 1st, 1879. Today, Josiah smiled at me, and I knew my life was beginning. A pressed flower fell from between the pages, yellow, brittle as old skin, but still holding its color after 3 years of being sealed away in darkness. Lenora caught it in her palm and held it to the fading light. Still yellow, still beautiful, still here, like a promise someone made and could not keep. The front door opened. Lenora's heart seized. She pressed the journal shut, tucked it under a dish towel on the counter, and turned to face Josiah with a face she prayed showed nothing of what she had just found. He stood in the doorway, covered in dust and sweat eyes, scanning the room the way they always did when he entered, taking stock, noting changes. She saw the moment his gaze found the extra cups drying by the basin, saw tracks in the yard. We had visitors, Mrs. Caldwell, and her daughter. They came to welcome me. He grunted, a sound that managed to convey skepticism, resignation, and complete understanding all at once. He went to the wash basin. Water splashed. What did she want? To inspect? To judge? To make sure I knew about Cecily? He dried his face slowly with the towel, keeping it pressed against his skin longer than necessary. When he lowered it, his expression was carefully, deliberately blank. She leave satisfied. She left something behind. Lenora pulled the journal from under the dish towel and set it on the table between them. The leather cover seemed to darken the wood beneath it. Josiah stared at it the way a man stares at a rattlesnake he has found coiled on his doorstep. Not surprised exactly, more like confirmed in a fear he had been carrying without admitting it. His hand reached out, pulled back, reached again. Finally, picked it up. Cecily's diary. His thumb traced the name embossed on the cover, moving over each letter like he was reading it through touch. Thought I had burned everything. Mrs. Caldwell left it on purpose. Sounds like her. And just like that, the ghost of Cecily Thorne stepped into the kitchen and sat down at the table between them, more present than she had been at any point since Lenora arrived. More present, perhaps, than she had been when she was alive. Josiah opened the journal to that first page. Read the words about smiling, about life beginning. His jaw worked, the muscle beneath the skin jumping like something trapped and trying to get free. You read it. It was not a question. But Lenora answered it anyway. Just the first page. Before you came in. He nodded, kept turning pages, stopped at one near the middle. Read silently while the kitchen darkened around them and the last light of day drew long shadows across the floor. His face softened, then hardened again like metal being worked by a blacksmith who cannot decide on the final shape. He closed the book. I need to tell you something about her, about what happened, about all of it. Lenora sat down across from him. The lantern between them threw light upward, carving his face into planes of gold and shadow. She waited. She had learned by now that Josiah Thorne could not be rushed toward truth. He arrived at it the way his mules arrived at water, steady and in his own time. When he began to speak, his voice was low and rough, and full of all the things he had not said to anyone in 3 years of silence. And Lenora listened, not because she needed to know about Cecily, but because Josiah needed someone to hear. Cecily was fragile. Josiah said it the way a man handles something already broken, careful not to cut himself on the edges. Not just her body, her mind, her spirit. She was beautiful and fragile. The way those teacups she ordered were beautiful and fragile. You could see the light through her if you held her up to it. The lantern flame guttered in a draft from somewhere. Shadows shifted on the walls like restless ghosts settling in to listen. She was a banker's daughter from Dallas. Read too many romantic novels about the frontier West. Thought ranch life was going to be sunsets and freedom and adventure. He paused, rubbed his thumb across the journal's cover in a slow circle over and over like a man working a worry stone. Nobody told her about the wind that never stops, the dirt that gets into everything no matter how many times you sweep, the loneliness that sits on your chest at night when the nearest neighbor is 5 miles off and the coyotes are the only things talking. Lenora said nothing. She understood that silence was what this moment required, not comfort, not questions. Just the space for a man to lay down something he had been carrying alone for 3 years. She hated it here at first. Josiah continued. His eyes were fixed on the table on the wood Lenora had scrubbed clean, and she wondered if he was seeing the surface as it was now, or as it had been when another woman's hands had set plates upon it. The isolation, the heat in summer, the cold in winter that got into your bones and stayed until April. The constant work that never ended and never produced anything pretty. He stood abruptly, went to the window. His back blocked the last light so that the kitchen seemed to shrink around his silhouette. But she tried. Lord knows she tried. Painted flowers on the walls to make things cheerful. Sang while she did her chores, ordered those teacups from the Sears catalog like having China roses in the kitchen could make up for the absence of real ones. She made this place feel like something more than boards and nails and function. For a little while she made it feel like home. His fingers found the window frame, gripped it until the knuckles went white. When she got pregnant, she was so happy I thought she might float off the ground entirely. Started sewing little clothes before the first month was even done. Planning a nursery in the lean-to room. Picking names. Josiah Jr. for a boy. Rose for a girl. She laughed more in those first weeks than she had in the whole year before. He turned from the window. The lamplight caught the wetness on his face, but Lenora pretended not to see it. Some things a man needs to keep, even when they are spilling out of him. I built the cradle she wanted. Spent 2 months carving flowers on the headboard because she drew them for me on a piece of brown paper and said, "Please." I would have built her a cathedral if she had drawn one on that paper. Lenora thought about the lean-to room, her room now, the new lumber smell, the careful construction, the bolts on the doors, no sign of a nursery, no cradle, no painted flowers on those walls. The labor started early, 2 months early. I wanted to ride for the doctor right away, but she said no, just false pains. They will pass by the time I realized. By the time I understood that something was truly wrong. He sat back down, not in his chair, on the floor beside the stove with his back against the wall like a man whose legs have decided they are finished holding him up. The nearest doctor was 20 miles away. Roads were nothing but mud from spring rain. Took me 5 hours to get there and back. 5 hours she labored with nobody except old Mrs. Henley from the next ranch, who did her best, but whose best was not near enough. When I got back with the doctor, Cicely was barely conscious. Baby was stuck. Had been for hours. The doctor did what he could. Got the baby out, but it never breathed. Never opened its eyes. Never cried. Not once. She held on another day. Long enough, too. She held on another day. Long enough to understand what happened. Long enough to blame herself. To apologize over and over for failing me. Like it was her fault. Like her body had made a choice. And she was responsible for the choice it made. His voice cracked on the last word. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in stories. Just a small fracture, like a hairline crack in pottery, that you do not notice until you run your finger across it. I told her it was not her fault. Told her we would try again when she got stronger. Lied right to her face while she was dying, and she knew I was lying, and I knew she knew. And we both just kept pretending because the truth was too big to fit in that room. That was not lying, Lenora said quietly. That was kindness. Was it? He looked at her then. Really looked. This was open, unguarded. The look of a man who had taken off his armor and was showing her the damage underneath. Know what her last words were. Not "I love you." Not "remember me." Not even "goodbye." Just find someone stronger. The words sat between them heavy as stones at the bottom of a well. Lenora let them sit. Did not try to lift them or move them or explain them away. Just let them be what they were. The final request of a woman who died believing her greatest failure was her body's inability to do what bodies are supposed to do. She understood now. Why he had built the lean-to. Why he had come to the depot that September afternoon. Why he had chosen her. The woman already proven barren. Already rejected. Already stamped with the word defective by a doctor in Fort Worth, and a husband who did not have the courage to be kind about it. He had chosen someone who could not fail him the way Cicely had failed herself. Could not die trying to give him what her body could not give. There was a dark logic to it, a mathematics of grief that added up to something that looked like cruelty, but was actually the deepest kind of self-protection. I did not want stronger, Josiah said. After she died, I did not want anything. Just work and silence, and no more losing people. 3 years of that. 3 years of getting up before the sun and falling down after it and filling every hour between with enough labor to keep the thoughts from getting in. But you sent the advertisement. You wrote for a bride. Ranch needs 2 people. Cannot do it alone forever, much as I tried. And the men around here, they talk. Bachelor with property becomes a target. Widows appearing with casseroles they did not ask for. Fathers pushing daughters they do not want. Easier to have a wife. Safer. Safer. There it was. The word that unlocked everything. So you picked the one nobody wanted. I picked the one who stood straight while the world laughed at her. That is different. Something shifted in Lenora's chest. Something quieter than hope. Something that did not need a name to be real. The journal still lay on the table. Josiah looked at it from his place on the floor. In the lamplight, the leather cover seemed to breathe. You want to read the rest of it? He said. No. You sure? Might answer questions you have. I do not have questions about Cicely. I have questions about you. His eyebrows lifted. The first surprise she had put on his face since the day they met. That first day, Lenora said. When Prescott was telling you about my situation, you already knew, did you not? Before he said a word. Suspected. How? The way the other women kept their distance from you. The way you held yourself separate. The way you looked like a woman preparing for a blow that had not landed yet. He met her eyes straight on. Recognized it. Same way I stood after Cecily died, waiting for the next hurt to arrive. And you picked me anyway, because of it. Figured we would understand each other. Two people who have already been broken. Nothing left to break. Lenora stood and started pulling things together for supper. Beans, cornbread fixings. The simple motions of cooking that did not require thought and therefore left room for the thoughts that mattered. You are wrong about that, she said, with her back to him. About what? Nothing left to break. She opened the bean pot and stirred. There is always something left. Question is whether it is worth the risk. She heard his chair scrape, his footsteps crossing to his bedroom, the door closing soft behind him. Not angry, not retreating. Just a man who had said more in one evening than he had said in 3 years and needed to be alone with the weight of his own words. When he came back, he was carrying something wrapped in brown paper, a flat package, soft, that bent slightly in his hands. He set it on the table. Found this when I was cleaning out the attic before you came. Was going to burn it along with everything else. Do not know why I kept it. Lenora dried her hands on her apron and unwrapped the paper carefully. Inside was a dress, yellow calico with tiny blue flowers printed on the fabric. Simple, but well made. Cut for work, but pretty enough for church, if church was the kind of place where practical women were welcome. Was it Cecily's? No. Bought it in town when I placed the marriage advertisement. Figured whoever answered would need working clothes. Ranch life is hard on fancy dresses. You bought this before you knew who was coming. Yes, but you did not give it to me. 3 weeks I have been here, and you kept it wrapped in brown paper. Something moved behind his eyes. That weather system of emotion that she had learned to read even when his face stayed flat did not seem right. Giving you something meant for someone I had not met yet, even if that someone turned out to be you. She folded the dress carefully and wrapped it back in its paper. She would take it, would wear it, but not tonight. Tonight it was enough to know it existed, that he had thought of whoever was coming, that he had considered comfort and dignity even when he expected nothing from the arrangement except labor. I will take it now, if that is all right. It is yours. They stood across the table from each other, late light coming through the window at an angle that turned the dust motes into gold. She could hear the chickens settling for the night, the wind picking up as it always did toward evening, the distant low of cattle in the home pasture. Josiah. She said his name for the first time, not Mr. Thorne. Josiah. Yeah, thank you for telling me about Cecily. Figured you had a right, living in her house, using her things. It is not her house anymore. Josiah. He looked around the kitchen, at the clean windows, the organized shelves, the table scrubbed to bare wood, the coffee pot without grease, the floor without dust. At all the small ways Lenora had made this space hers without removing anything that had been there before. No, he said slowly. Suppose it is not. He went back outside to finish the evening chores. Lenora returned to supper, the yellow dress on the chair beside her like a guest waiting to be acknowledged. That night, after he had gone to his room, and the house had settled into its nighttime sounds of boards and wind and breathing through thin walls, Lenora sat alone at the kitchen table with Cecily's journal She had told Josiah she did not have questions about his dead wife. That had been true when she said it, but the journal pulled at her the way deep water pulls at someone standing on the bank, not with force, with gravity. She opened it past the first pages she had already seen, past the pressed yellow flower and the entry about smiling and the entries about ordering teacups and planning improvements. February 14th, 1879. I painted bluebonnets on the bedroom wall today. They look nothing like real bluebonnets, but Josiah said they were beautiful, and I could tell he meant it, or meant to mean it. Sometimes I cannot tell the difference. Does it matter if kindness is genuine or performed if the result is the same? March 9th, 1879. The wind has blown for 11 days straight. I counted. 11 days of sand in my teeth and grit in my eyes, and a sound like the earth is trying to scream. I painted more flowers on the kitchen wall. Roses this time. I am running out of walls. April 22nd, 1879. I am beginning to wonder if Josiah married me or married the idea of me. The pretty girl from Dallas who would brighten his ranch. He loves who I am trying to be, but that is not who I am. I am a woman who is afraid of horses and hates the taste of well water and cries at night when the coyotes sound too close. I do not know how to tell him this. I do not know if he wants to hear it. Lenora's hands stilled on the page. There it was. The crack in the portrait that Mrs. Caldwell had painted so carefully. The perfect Cecily. The accomplished Cecily. The Cecily who played piano and spoke French and won needlework prizes. The Cecily who cried at night and painted flowers on walls, because the world outside those walls was too big and too empty and too demanding. She read on. June 3rd. 1879. Sometimes I think the loneliness will swallow me whole. Not from lack of love. Josiah is kind, but from the gap between who I am and who this place needs me to be. I am playing a role. Frontier wife, prairie woman, strong and capable and unafraid. The performance is exhausting, and I am so tired of performing. The entries grew shorter after that. Sparser. The handwriting less careful, as if the effort of forming perfect letters had become another performance she could not sustain. Then, near the back of the journal, Lenora found what she had not known she was looking for. The handwriting changed. Darker. Rougher. Pressed deep into the paper with the kind of pressure that comes from a hand gripping a pencil like a lifeline. Not Cecily's hand, Josiah's. The entry was dated 2 weeks before the day at the depot. 2 weeks before he walked through that crowd and chose the woman nobody wanted. Cecily told me to find someone stronger. Been thinking about what she meant by that. Maybe not stronger body. Maybe stronger at being alone. Stronger at accepting less. Stronger at surviving without love. Or maybe stronger a different way. Strong enough to not need me to be something I am not. Strong enough to live in this house without trying to turn it into somewhere else. Strong enough to see this land for what it is instead of what it is not. Maybe I am the one who needs to be stronger. Strong enough to try again. Different this time. True this time. Lenora read those last 4 words 3 times. Different this time. True this time. She closed the journal, pressed her palm flat against the cover as if she could feel his heartbeat through the leather. She looked at the stove. The fire was burning well, hot enough to consume paper in seconds. All she had to do was open the iron door and toss the journal in. End the comparisons. stop Cecily's ghost from walking these rooms. Her hand reached for the stove handle, fingers closing around the warm metal. Then she stopped. She carried the journal to the shelf where Josiah kept his almanac and the feed supply records and a Bible that showed no sign of recent opening. She placed the journal there upright between the almanac and the Bible where it could be seen, where it belonged, not hidden, not burned, not worshipped, just present, the way memory should be, acknowledged and allowed to rest. Cecily deserved to be remembered, not as a saint or a ghost or a standard against which every woman who came after would be measured, but as a person, a woman who tried and struggled and painted flowers on walls because the real ones would not grow. A woman who loved a man she could not quite reach and a life she could not quite fit. Lenora blew out the lamp and went to her lean-to room and bolted both doors and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of a house that was slowly, cautiously becoming hers. Through the wall she heard Josiah, not the steady breathing of sleep this time, something else, quiet, almost inaudible, the kind of sound a man makes when he is crying and does not want anyone to know. Muffled into a pillow or pressed against a forearm, the raw, stifled grief of someone who has been holding himself together with work and silence for 3 years and can feel the seams beginning to give. Lenora lay still, did not get up, did not knock on his door or call his name through the wall. Some grief needs to be witnessed and some grief needs to be private, and the wisdom is in knowing which is which. But the next morning, she made his coffee stronger than usual, and she did not ask why his eyes were red, and he did not explain, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full. The days after the journal carried a different quality, like the air after a fever breaks, still fragile, still careful, but cleaner somehow. Josiah said Cecily's name one morning without flinching, mentioned the garden plot and how Cecily had wanted climbing roses there, but the soil was wrong. Lenora said maybe sage would do better, practical, native, something that belonged in this ground. Maybe, he said, and almost smiled. Lenora wore the yellow calico dress for the first time on a Wednesday. No occasion, no announcement. Just put it on because it fit and because she wanted to. When she came into the kitchen, Josiah looked at her, then looked at his coffee. The back of his neck flushed red above his collar line. "Suits you," he said to the coffee cup. She did not respond, did not need to. The dress said what needed saying. I am here. I am staying. I am not Cecily, and I am not trying to be. That evening on the porch for the first time, he called her Lenora instead of Miss Hargrove. Did not announce it. Did not make it ceremonial. Just let her name come out of his mouth like it had always been there waiting. Lenora, would you hand me that awl? She handed it to him. Their fingers brushed in the transfer. Neither pulled away. Neither mentioned it. But the air between them changed in a way that had nothing to do with weather. The following week, Lenora went to town for supplies. Josiah had given her a list written in his careful rough hand. Nails, flour, coffee, salt. She took the small wagon and the gentler of the 2 mules and drove herself because she had learned to drive by week 2, and because asking for help with things she could manage alone was not in her constitution. She was loading flour sacks when a shadow fell across the wagon bed. Well now. Silas Brennan leaned against the hitching post like he owned it and everything tied to it. If it is not Mrs. Thorne, all alone in the big town. Mr. Brennan. He looked different in daylight without soot hiding his features. Broader than she remembered. His eyes moved over her and the wagon and the empty street behind her with the slow patience of a man who has all the time in the world and knows it. Heard some things about you since we last met. He kept his voice low. Conversational. The kind of tone a man uses when he wants to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. Interesting things. About your previous situation back east. About why that first husband of yours sent you packing. Lenora set the flour sack down carefully, wiped her hands on her skirt, looked at him the way she looked at the rattlesnake she had found coiled in the chicken coop last Tuesday. With attention, but without panic. Seems your man Alden found you lacking in the one department that matters most. Silas continued. He picked at something between his teeth. Word is, the deficiency was confirmed by a medical professional. Makes a woman wonder what exactly she has to offer a man. And makes a man wonder how long before Thorne figures out the same thing everyone else already knows. The words were calculated, placed with the precision of a man who understood exactly which nerve to press and how hard. Not loud enough for anyone else in the street to hear. Just for her. Just between them. Mr. Brennan. Lenora heard her own voice come out level and clear, surprising even herself with its steadiness. I have been rejected by people far more important to me than you will ever be. My own blood turned their backs. My own husband looked at me like I was something broken he could not return fast enough. You think a man with a loud mouth is going to frighten me after that? You do not have the weight for it. She turned her back on him, loaded the last flour sack, climbed onto the wagon seat. Her hands trembled against the reins, but only after the mule had pulled her around the corner and Silas Brennan was behind her and could not see. His voice carried after her. Thorne is going to realize what you are sooner or later. When he does, I will still be around. Lenora drove home with the words sitting in her stomach like something swallowed that would not go down. Not because Silas frightened her. He did not. Not because his threats carried real danger, though she was not foolish enough to dismiss them entirely. Because he had named the fear she carried underneath everything else. The fear that lived below the clean floors and the strong coffee and the garden plot she was coaxing back to life. The fear that Josiah would one day look at her the way Alden had looked at her. The way her father had not looked at her. The way the crowd at the depot had looked at her. That she was not enough, would never be enough. That the deficiency was not in her body, but in her very self, and that every man who came close enough to see clearly would eventually arrive at the same conclusion and walk away. When she pulled up to the ranch, Josiah was standing at the gate, not waiting for her exactly, working on the hinge that had been sticking. But he looked up when she appeared, and something in his face tightened. Brennan, he said. Not a question. She nodded, climbed down, started unloading supplies. What did he say? Nothing I have not heard before. Josiah was quiet for a long time. He took the flour sacks from her hands and carried them inside, came back for the nails and the coffee and the salt, set everything in its proper place without asking where things went because he had noticed where she kept things, now had learned the organization she had imposed on his kitchen the way she had learned his coffee preference. When everything was put away, he stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, looking at her with those winter grass eyes. You should not have to hear things like that, he said. from anyone, simple and clear as water from the spring, and enough. Lenora looked at him standing there, framed by the doorway with the evening light behind him, and felt the last wall between them develop a crack she was not sure she wanted to repair. The sky turned the color of old bones 3 days later. Lenora noticed it first while feeding the chickens. The light had gone wrong. Not golden autumn warmth, but something sickly, the color of a bruise deciding what shade of pain to become. The air pressed down thick and still, the kind of stillness that makes breathing feel like labor. The chickens had stopped their usual business. They huddled near the coop door heads, tucked feathers tight. The rooster sat motionless on his perch eyes, fixed on something only animals can see. Even the flies had gone quiet. In Texas, flies never stopped. When the flies went silent, something was coming that even insects wanted no part of. Storm coming. Josiah called from the barn where he was driving cattle into the near corral. Big one. He pointed west where the sky had turned green so dark it looked like the underside of a lake. Clouds churned against each other with slow, terrible patience. Fill everything that holds water. Bathtub. Buckets. Pots. This could last days. Lenora ran for the kitchen as the first wind hit. Not gradual build, but immediate slam that nearly knocked her sideways. Dust rose in a sheet, turning noon to twilight. Inside, she pumped until her arms burned. Filled the wash tub, the cooking pots, Cecily's china cups because they held water same as anything. And this was not the time for sentiment. Through the window, Josiah wrestled boards over glass, his shirt whipping against his body. Thunder came, not sharp cracks, but deep, rolling pressure she felt in her chest before her ears registered it. Lightning followed in sheets of white that lit everything stark and shadowless. Temperature dropped 20 degrees between breaths. Josiah burst through the door, hair wild a cut bleeding on his cheek from flying debris. Cellar. Now. But the house. Look. Through the last unboarded window. She saw it. The horizon replaced by a wall of clouds so dark it looked solid, green-black, and rotating. At its base, reaching toward the earth like the finger of something that did not care about houses or people, a funnel. Moving toward them with unhurried certainty. 10 minutes, maybe less. They grabbed what hands found first. Water bucket. Lantern. Egg basket because her hands reached for it without thinking. Josiah seized rifle rope blanket. The cellar door fought them when trying to rip it skyward. They half fell down stone steps as hail hit. Ice chunks the size of walnuts hammering everything like artillery. Josiah hauled the door shut above them. Then just the two of them underground. 8 feet square. Stone walls. Dirt floor. Shelves of preserved goods. Lantern swinging wild from a beam. The smell of earth and the dampness of spaces that never see sun. The house above them began to die, not all at once, but in stages each worse than the last. Windows shattering, boards tearing free like rifle shots, wood screaming as nails pulled from joists, the tin roof peeling away with a shriek that sounded human. Something heavy struck the floor above them. The ceiling boards bowed and dirt showered down. Get down. Josiah pulled her against the back wall, covered her with his body. Arms locked around her solid as oak beams. She felt his heart hammering against her cheek, fast and steady, despite everything above them. The roar arrived. Not wind anymore. Something alive and hungry, a sound so complete it erased all others. The lantern flame flattened to blue, then died. Perfect darkness. The kind with weight that presses against open eyes. The cellar door exploded outward, ripped from hinges. Tornado directly overhead. Pressure changed until her ears felt ready to burst. She could feel it pulling at them the way deep water pulls at a swimmer too far from shore. Josiah's grip tightened until she could not tell where he ended and she began. His lips moved against her hair. She could not hear over the roar, but felt the shape of words against her scalp. Her name. Over and over. Lenora. 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 An anchor dropped into chaos. She turned and his arms buried her face in his chest, held on with everything. Fists knotted in his shirt. Legs braced against stone. If they died, they would die together. Not alone. Not the way either had been living for 3 years. Time lost meaning. The world came apart above them with sounds she would hear in dreams for whatever years remained. Main beam splitting. Glass cascading. A wall groaning past its breaking point. Then sudden as a slammed door, the roar retreated. Pressure eased. Air rushed back like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how. Silence. The ringing in her ears. Josiah's ragged breathing. And her own crying quiet and steady as spring rain soaking into his shirt. She had not known she was crying until the sound stopped and she could hear herself. Stay here. His voice scraped raw. No. She held tighter. Together. Or not at all. He pulled back enough to find her face in gray light filtering where the door had been. His hand came up slow. Touched her cheek. Thumb tracing tears with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that had spent 3 years building fences and digging graves. Together then, they climbed out into a world rearranged. Where the kitchen should have been, sky showed through. Roof gone. Half the walls following. The cast iron stove sat untouched, still warm, a monument to stubbornness. Cecily's teacups on their shelf filled with rainwater while the shelf above had vanished. The barn was erased, not collapsed. Gone. One confused cow stood in the wreckage, turning slow circles. The chicken coop had been carried 20 feet and deposited upside down. Furious, squawking from underneath. Josiah laughed. The kind that lives next to weeping. Chickens survived. Barn did not. Lord has himself a sense of humor. Then Lenora saw the lean-to. Her room. Gone. Floor remaining. One wall at an impossible angle. Everything else, carpet bag, yellow, calico, dress, mother's Bible, all of it lifted and scattered across the prairie by a force beyond argument. Josiah looked at the empty space where her room had been. Every defense he had built over 3 years dropped at once, leaving his face open and unguarded in a way she had never seen. Things can be replaced. His voice carried something that sounded like tenderness. You cannot. Before she could respond, hooves from the south, Boone Caldwell appeared on a lathered horse, bleeding from a dozen cuts, clothes in strips, eyes wild with the terror of a boy who has learned adults cannot stop the world from breaking. Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne. Tornado hit our place dead on. Pa is trapped under the house beam. Mama sent me for help. Josiah was already pulling tools from wreckage. Shovel, pry bar, rope wound around the water pump. I am coming too, Lenora said. Could be dangerous. You need every hand. And I know doctoring. My mother taught me. He looked at her the way he had looked at her hands on the depot platform, at what was underneath. He nodded. They caught horses from the far pasture and rode hard through a landscape from Revelation. Trees stripped bare as bones, fences erased, dead cattle scattered. The tornado's path carved through prairie straight as a railroad, everything on one side untouched, everything on the other destroyed. The Caldwell place was worse than description could prepare for. House lifted, twisted, set down wrong. Walls leaning at angles that hurt the eyes. Mrs. Caldwell stood at what used to be the front door. Hair wild, dress torn. The woman who had sat rigid on horseback dispensing judgment was barely recognizable. When she saw them, controlled terror lost its battle. Thank the Lord. He is under here. I can hear him, but cannot reach him. From beneath the wreckage came a sound past screaming. The sound pain makes when voice cannot carry it anymore. Josiah walked the structure, reading it the way a doctor reads a body. 5 more men arrived. They gathered and saw the problem. The main beam held the remaining weight of the collapsed house. Same beam pinning Caldwell's legs. Lift it wrong, everything pancakes down. One miscalculation, and they pull out a corpse. Lenora looked at the angles, the weight distributions, the gaps where light showed through, and remembered the mine collapse in Pennsylvania when she was 12. 3 men trapped. Rescue crew pulled from above. 2 died when removing one beam caused a cascade. The 3rd survived because her mother grabbed the foreman's arm and said, "Build from the side. Stop." She said it loud enough to cut through wind and groaning wood and the debate of 6 uncertain men. You cannot lift from above. You will bring it down on him. Every face turned toward her. A woman in a torn dress telling them their instincts were wrong. I have seen this before. She pointed at the stress lines. Mine collapse when I was a girl. We go in from the side. Build a tunnel with braces. Reach him without disturbing the weight above. 3 heartbeats of silence. Show me, Josiah said. No hesitation. No pride requiring him to question her. Boone fence posts for braces. Mr. Johnson flatboards. We are building a passage, not a bridge. Every piece tested before it bears weight. Every brace checked twice. Nobody rushes. They worked. Josiah beside her, following her lead without ego, moving together the way they moved in the kitchen and the cellar. Tools appearing before she asked. Steps anticipated before taken. 20 minutes of patience, fighting every instinct to go faster while a man's life bled away. When the tunnel was solid, Josiah went in head first. Rope around his waist. Lenora holding the other end with 3 men braced behind her. She heard his voice in the darkness, the steady calm he used with frightened animals. You are not alone. We are getting you out. Pull now. Steady. Do not jerk. They pulled. Caldwell screamed once, and then consciousness left him, which was mercy. Josiah emerged, dragging the man by his shoulders. Both legs broken below the knee. Left twisted at a sickening angle. Right bent backward where no joint existed. Bone pressing skin from inside on the right. But no pulsing blood. No severed arteries. Lenora was beside him immediately. Hands finding pulse. Fingers reading fractures through swollen flesh the way her mother taught her. Feeling edges. Mapping breaks. Both legs need setting now. She told Mrs. Caldwell, if these bones heal at these angles, he will never stand. Josiah cut splints. Lenora mixed carbolic acid with water. Boone held shoulders. 4 men held hips. Josiah at the feet, ready to pull on her word. On 3. 1, 2. She nodded. He pulled steady while her hands guided bone back toward alignment. The left leg surrendered with a grinding sensation that traveled through her fingers into her wrists. The right fought her. Break worse. Bone ends overlapped. I have to re-break it, she said, to set it true. Mrs. Caldwell seized her arm hard enough to leave bruises that would darken like flowers blooming in reverse. Save him. Lenora re-broke the bone. The sound it made was something she would carry in silence for the rest of her days. Caldwell was beyond consciousness. She set it true, splinted both legs, wrapped them clean in carbolic-soaked cloth, checked pulse in both feet to ensure blood still flowed past the swelling. She sat back on her heels, hands red to the wrists, dress destroyed, sun bleeding out across the ruined landscape in shades of copper and rust. Mrs. Caldwell knelt before her, slowly the way a woman approaches something she has finally recognized as sacred. She took Lenora's bloody hands in her own. I was wrong. The word cracked in the middle like the bone Lenora had just set. Everything I said, everything I implied about Cicely, about you not belonging. I was wrong. Lenora cried, not the quiet tears of the cellar. This came from the deep place where she had stored every closed door and turned back and public humiliation, where she had packed her father's refusal to look up from his newspaper, where she had folded the memory of Alden's hands in the dark and the doctor's word that changed everything, where she had buried the depot laughter so deep she thought it could never surface. It all came up. She let it come because Mrs. Caldwell was holding her hands and Josiah was standing behind her, and for the first time, the people around her were not the source of pain, but witnesses to its release. When the tears slowed and she stood on legs that trembled but held and turned around, Josiah was looking at her. The way you look at something you have just realized you cannot live without. The way you look at daylight after being underground. The way you look at home when you have finally stopped running long enough to recognize it. They rode back in full darkness, side by side through wreckage they could feel but not see. Neither spoke. There were no words large enough for what had happened between dawn and now. The storm, the cellar, the wreckage, the tunnel, the bone, the blood. Mrs. Caldwell on her knees, saying words Lenora had waited a lifetime to hear. Halfway home in darkness, where neither could see the other's face, fingers found fingers. She could not tell who reached first. It did not matter. What mattered was that hands interlaced and held, and neither let go for the rest of the ride home. The ranch looked worse in moonlight. Shadows filled the gaps where walls should have been. The roofless kitchen gaped at the stars. The space where the barn had stood was a dark emptiness the eye kept trying to fill with memory. They unsaddled the horses in silence and turned them into the corral that had survived by luck or divine indifference. Josiah stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at what remained. Stove still works. Got one bedroom with walls and a ceiling. Could be worse. Could be dead, Lenora said. Could be that. The bedroom was his. She had never been inside it. Had respected that boundary the way she respected all his boundaries. The room was spare. Iron bed frame, washstand, 2 clean shirts on hooks. And on the wall beside the bed, faded almost to invisibility painted bluebonnets. Cecily's work. Petals uneven, stems too straight, color bleeding where paint was mixed too thin. But put there with love and hope and the desperate need to make bare walls into something more. Lenora looked at those flowers and felt no jealousy. Only the quiet recognition of one woman's effort to bloom in soil not made for her. We share the bed. She said it plain because plain was the only language left, both too tired for anything except sleep. Josiah nodded. They prepared in careful choreography. Lenora behind the painted screen. Josiah with his back turned, pulling off boots caked with ash and blood. The mattress dipped toward the middle when they lay down, gravity pulling them closer than propriety allowed, and neither fighting it. Silence. Full silence. Two people who had been through fire and wind and blood and come out still breathing. Josiah spoke first. In the cellar, when I thought we might not come out. I realized something about that page I wrote in Cecily's journal, about being strong enough to try again. She waited. I thought I meant strong enough to try having a wife, the practical business of sharing labor and dividing work. But that was not it. His voice came soft, barely louder than breathing. I meant strong enough to choose. Not fall into something because circumstance pushed me. Not accept someone because the ranch needed hands. But choose. Deliberate. Eyes open. Knowing what it costs when you care about someone in a world that takes people away without asking. The bed creaked as he turned toward her. She could feel his warmth across the small space between them. I am not choosing an arrangement anymore. She turned toward him, could barely see his face in moonlight, just the line of jaw, shadow where eyes should be, the shape of a man taking down walls he had spent 3 years building. I am not Sicily, she said, cannot play piano, do not speak French. My needlework would not win anything anywhere. Thank the Lord for all of that. His hand found hers, calloused fingers closing with gentleness that contradicted every rough thing about him. I do not want Cecily. I loved her the way a man loves a painting, admired her, wanted to protect her. But I never saw her. Not really. She was dying of loneliness in my house, and I could not see it, because I loved who I needed her to be instead of who she was. He squeezed her hand. I see you, Lenora. Saw you on that platform with blood on your hands and steel in your spine. Saw you scrub my kitchen your first night while fire burned on the horizon. Saw you face Silas Brennan with nothing but your voice and your backbone. Saw you today telling 6 men how to save a life, and every one of them listened because you were the strongest person standing. I want you. If you choose me back. Lenora thought about every person who had decided she was not enough. Alden, her father, her mother with the softly closed door, Prescott, the depot crowd, and their laughter. Then she thought about gloves left on a table, a board fixed while she was in the garden, a room with locks built before he knew her name, arms in a cellar while the world ended, and now this man who had lost everything asking if she would let him risk again. I choose you, simple and clear as spring water, not because I have nowhere else, because you saw my hands bleeding and did not look away, because you built me a room with a lock before you knew I existed, because you are the first person who looked at me and saw something worth choosing. His kiss was careful, not timid. Careful the way a man handles something he has wanted for a long time and is afraid of breaking. A question asked with lips. She answered it. When they pulled apart forehead against forehead, breathing the same air. We rebuild, he said. Different this time. The way we want it. Together. Together. They settled into each other. Her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, Cecily's bluebonnets fading into darkness above them, coyotes calling outside, wind through the roofless kitchen. But inside this room, two people who had expected nothing found everything. Morning came slow and golden and indifferent to whatever happened the night before. Lenora woke first, felt Josiah's arm across her waist, allowed herself 3 seconds of stillness before the work called. She built fire in the stove that outlasted the storm, made coffee, found eggs where hens had returned to routine despite the upended coop, cooked breakfast under open sky where the roof should have been sunrise falling through the gap like the first kitchen at the beginning of the world. Neighbors arrived before noon. Word had traveled fast and thorough. Boone and Willa brought food and news that Mr. Caldwell was awake in pain but alive because of what Lenora had done. Other families came with lumber and nails and willingness to work alongside people they had whispered about weeks before. Mrs. Caldwell arrived by late morning, not on horseback, in a wagon loaded with supplies and something entirely different in her bearing. She did not apologize with words. She apologized with action, showed Lenora how to cure meat, asked her opinion on herbs for her husband's healing, deferred to her judgment on poultice schedules. Silas Brennan came too, rode up on his horse with an offer to help that fooled nobody. Lenora met him in the yard before he could dismount. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Brennan, but we have all the hands we need today." He looked at her, looked at Josiah watching from the barn frame with a hammer and an expression suggesting the hammer might find alternative use. Silas tipped his hat and rode away without a word. The first time she had seen him leave in silence. Even his horse seemed to understand there was nothing left to say here. Josiah came to stand beside her as hoofbeats faded. "You do not need me fighting your battles." "No." She watched dust settle. "But I want you standing next to me when I fight them." Willa found Lenora during the water break, flushed from carrying lumber hair escaping every pin. "Mrs. Thorne, can I ask you something about Boone? How do you know when someone is the right person?" Lenora looked across the yard where Josiah was teaching Boone to notch a joint. Patient, unhurried. The right person sees you when you are not trying to shine, not when your hair is pinned and your best dress is on, when you are covered in dirt doing the hardest work of your life. If they still look at you like you are worth seeing, that is your answer. 2 days later, they drove to town for supplies, past the depot where it began. The platform stood empty in the afternoon light. Lenora looked at it for a long moment, let herself see it fully. The wood where she had stood alone while the world laughed. The spot where her fingernails had drawn blood from her own palms. The place where she had been the last one, the unwanted one, the returned merchandise that Prescott did not know how to sell. She looked until the memory lost its teeth, until the platform became just wood and nails and faded paint, no different from any other structure built by hands that did not know what their work would come to mean. Then she looked away, and did not look back. At the general store, Josiah signed the ledger. Lenora watched his hand move across the page. Josiah and Lenora Thorne. The shopkeeper glanced at the signature, glanced at Lenora, nodded once. No laughter, no whispers. Just her name beside his in a book that meant they existed here together. On the road home, she spoke into the silence between them. That day, at the depot, when you said, "Give me the one nobody wanted," I think that might be the most beautiful thing anyone ever said to me. Josiah was quiet the way he always was when working towards something true. I did not say it because you were unwanted. I said it because every person in that crowd was blind. And I was tired of blind people deciding what has value. The ranch was taking shape when they crested the hill. New barn frame against the sky. Walls rising where walls had fallen. Chickens laying eggs with the pragmatic resilience of creatures who do not waste time mourning what was. That morning, Lenora had planted an oak seedling from the creek bank in front of the house. Not roses like the widow Morrison, not painted flowers like Cecily put on walls because real ones would not survive. An oak. The kind of tree that takes years to grow, but once grown cannot be moved or broken or persuaded to be anything other than what it is. Josiah had nailed a sign to the gatepost. Fresh cedar. Letters carved deep. Thorne Ranch. Established 1882. Lenora pressed her palm against the wood. This was home. Not because it was given, because she chose to stay. Chose to build, chose to plant a tree that would outlive her in soil she turned with her own hands. Inside, she built up the fire, started supper. Josiah sat at the table she had scrubbed to bare pine her first night. He watched her move through the kitchen, still open to sky, and his face held the expression she had come to understand as his love language. Quiet attention, steady presence. The willingness to be in the same room and let silence speak. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither spoke. The space between them was full of everything they had survived and chosen and would build. Outside, the oak seedling stood in last light, small and bare, but its roots were in the ground, and roots planted by someone who knows what she is doing do not let go. Sometimes the one nobody wanted becomes the one everybody needs. Sometimes the strongest love is not the kind that sweeps you off your feet, but the kind that plants itself in ordinary dirt and refuses to be uprooted. And sometimes the person who sees you when nobody else looks turns out to be the one you were waiting for all along. Not because they are perfect, because they are true. Lenora Hargrove came to Millerton with a carpet bag light as hope and heavy as failure. She found a man who chose her when she was the last one standing. She found a home, built with her own hands from someone else's wreckage. She found a life she did not dare imagine on that depot platform while the world laughed. And the world, as it always does, eventually stopped laughing and started paying attention.